Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Quest for Quarters. On episodes like these, I take you through underrated budget cards that you should be considering when you're building your decks. For these episodes, not only does every card have to be under $1, but they also need to be used in less than 4% of eligible decks on EDHREC. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCG Player affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's first underrated Quest for Quarters card is Dreamtides. It comes in at 41 cents and sees play in less than 400 decks. It's an enchantment for 2 blue and it says creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may choose any number of tapped non-green creatures they control and pay 2 for each creature chosen this way if the player does untap those creatures. So first off, this card can completely shut down green creatures. Once a green creature is tapped, they're not going to be able to untap it during their untap step. And then for the other non-green creatures, they're taxed to untap them. And 2 mana per creature is a lot of mana to pay. This card is going to make all players think twice about tapping or attacking with creatures. Green decks especially have to get rid of this or they're going to be stuck. Now this effect is a symmetrical effect, so it does affect you as well. Obviously this is not for every single kind of deck. If you're running a lot of creatures that need to tap or attack, you're not going to want to run this. But in the right deck, this card can be an absolute bomb. If you don't care about creatures, this really hinders your opponents and doesn't affect you at all. This especially works great with other cards that can tap your opponent's creatures for you. This can be a huge card in a deck that's looking to control the board. But for comparison's sake, let's take a look at some similar cards. First up, there's Meekstone, which is just under $6 and sees play in over 3,100 decks. It's an artifact that costs 1 and it says creatures with power 3 or greater don't untap during their controller's untap steps. So this card is different in that it only impacts bigger creatures. In comparison, Dreamtides impacts all creatures in multiple ways. If the creature is green, it's not going to untap no matter what. And players can untap other creatures, but they have to be taxed to do so. Meekstone can definitely be more effective in certain situations and can be used in a low to the ground strategy. But for a deck that's really looking to control the board and slow down all creatures, Dreamtides might be a better option. In my opinion, if Meekstone wasn't nearly $6, it would definitely be seeing more play. The same could be said for Crackdown, which comes in at $5.25 and sees play in only 490 decks. It's an enchantment for 2 and a white, and it says non-white creatures with power 3 or greater don't untap during their controller's untap steps. So this is pretty much the exact same thing as Meekstone, but it only affects non-white creatures. So in a mono-white deck, this can be a very effective card, only affecting opponents' creatures and not affecting your own. But still, for a general control strategy, Dreamtides is going to be more impactful. Although it is quite different, I do like to think of Dreamtides along the lines of a Ghostly Prison. Currently, Ghostly Prison is $2.54 and sees play in over 18,000 decks. It's an enchantment for 2 and a white, and it says creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. So this is a good way to deter attacks by forcing your opponents to pay for each creature attacking you. Although Dreamtides doesn't prevent opponents from attacking you, it does deter them as well. Because if they do so, they will set to pay that tax to untap those creatures. And again, green creatures won't be able to untap at all. Now, Ghostly Prison is going to be more effective in most situations, but I definitely think Dreamtides is still very underrated. It's a fantastic deterrent and can be used very effectively with other things to control the board. But now let's go through some decks where it might be a good fit. A stacks deck like Grand Arbiter or Gustin IV can be a great spot for this. Slowing down the game and preventing your opponents from doing things is exactly what those kinds of decks want to do. This can also work great in a Zedruu deck too. Giving it to an opponent doesn't change its effect at all. And there are also niche commanders that can work really well with this, like Abyshin. You can just keep tapping down all creatures without flying and some others as well. Again, Dreamtides is not for every deck, but it's a great way to deter attacks and to control the board. There are plenty of control decks out there that haven't considered it yet and should be. Today's second underrated Quest for Quarters card is Emrakul's Evangel. Currently it's just 14 cents and sees play in 333 decks. It's a 3/2 human horror that costs 2 and a green. You can tap to sacrifice it and any number of other non-Eldrazi creatures and put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token onto the battlefield for each creature sacrificed this way. This is a very unique effect, especially for green. This card is essentially a one-time mass sacrifice to replace all your creatures with 3/2s. Now this can be effective in multiple ways. If you've got any leave the battlefield triggers or enter the battlefield triggers, this can get you a ton of them. And if you've got an army of small creatures, this can essentially just replace them all with bigger creatures. Now you might be thinking that this is a very narrow card for just very specific decks, but some of the most popular decks out there are aristocrat decks and token decks, and a ton of those decks could really use a card like this. But first, let's go over some cards to compare this to. First up, there's Pawn of Ulamog, which is currently $2.14 and sees play in over 6,000 decks. It's a 2/2 vampire shaman that costs 1 black. It says whenever Pawn of Ulamog or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add colors to your mana pool. So essentially this replaces any of your non-token creatures when they die with an Eldrazi spawn. So this can be a fantastic token generator in an aristocrat style deck. If it stays out for a while, it's going to give you a ton of value. Now, Emrakul's Evangel can also replace your creatures, but it's all at once. On top of that, it also benefits you from sacrificing tokens too. Now, in most situations, Pollen of Ulamog will be better, but a one-time mass sacrifice effect that gives you a ton of creatures can be very valuable too. Another somewhat similar card is Whisperwood Elemental. Currently it's almost $2 and sees play in over 1,400 decks. It's a 4/4 elemental for 3 green and it says at the beginning of your end step, manifest the top card of your library. And then sacrifice Whisperwood Elemental until the end of the turn, face up non-token creatures you control have when this creature dies, manifest the top card of your library. So essentially it replaces your non-token creatures when they die with manifest. So this is definitely different because it's more like board wipe protection instead of mass token generation. But still this can get you a ton of ETBs and LTBs all at once. Perhaps the most similar card though is actually a red one with Descent of the Dragons. Currently it's $1.77 and sees play in nearly 1,000 decks. It's a sorcery for 4 red and it says destroy any number of target creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller puts a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So with this one you can target your opponent's creatures and destroy them as well. But if you've got a ton of small creatures on the board, you can essentially just turn them all into 4/4 dragons. Both Emrakul's Evangel and Descent of the Dragons can essentially replace all your creatures with better ones. Now 4/4 dragons with flying are definitely better than 3/2 Eldrazi Horrors, but they're still very effective. If you're turning a bunch of 1/1s into 3/2s, that's a big jump. But now let's take a look at what decks this might fit into. One deck it can definitely fit into is Sekawar Deathkeeper. It's a deck that's already looking to sacrifice creatures to create a ton of tokens. Another token build that this can fit into is Reese the Redeemed. Turning all those 1/1 elves into 3/2s can be game ending. And finally, an aristocrat style deck like Azona can be the perfect place for it. In a deck like that, you're going to be getting a ton of death triggers. But now let's move on to our third Quest Recorders card today with Necrologia. Currently it's just 57 cents and sees play in less than 700 decks. It's an instant for 3 black, but you can only cast it during your end step. As an additional cost to cast it, you pay X life and you draw X cards. This can easily replenish your hand and then some if you need to. Life is an abundant resource in Commander since you start off with 40. If you have to dig deep for a specific card, you usually can. Especially in a life gaining strategy, this can be very effective. Now you won't be able to keep more than 7 cards since you have to cast it on your end step. But still for just 5 mana, you can refill your hand with the right cards. Now you might be thinking that there's one very similar card to this, and there is. And that card would be Necropotence, which is where this card gets its name from. Currently, Necropotence is over $11 and sees play in over 11,000 decks. It's an enchantment for black, and it says, skip your draw step whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard, pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library face down, put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. So basically, this is an enchantment version of Necrologia. Now, obviously this is going to be more effective because it is a repeatable effect. Necropotence is an extremely powerful card, which is why it commands that price and it sees play in a ton of decks. Even though Necrologia is just a one-shot version of this, it is still very effective. It helps you dig and replenish your hand for a very low cost. Again, 1 life for 1 card is a very easy trade to make in Commander. Another similar but expensive card is Ad Nauseam. Currently it's $13.21 and sees play in over 3,000 decks. It's an instant for 3 black, and it says reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. You may repeat this process any number of times. So with this, lands won't make you lose life, but other cards are going to. This can either be more or less effective depending on what you hit. But this one does have the advantage that you can just keep choosing to keep going instead of just having to choose that number at once. Also, it doesn't have that end step restriction that Necrologia has. Both definitely have their place in Commander and can be more or less effective depending on the situation. Final card that I just want to touch on though is Sign in Blood. Currently it's just 16 cents and sees play in over 8,000 decks. It's a sorcery for black, and it says target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. Again, 1 life for 1 card is a fantastic deal and this is a great way to illustrate that. I'm not saying that Necrologia needs to see play in over 8,000 decks like Sign in Blood, but still it's a very effective card. But now let's talk about what decks it might be a good fit in. First up there's Kambal, which is a deck that's great at gaining life. You can put that life to better use and draw a ton of cards and then gain that life back. Another deck where this is very effective is Selenia Dark Angel. That deck actually doesn't mind about getting its life total all the way down because it's going to swap it with someone else's anyways. And then Vilis Broker of Blood is another great one too. Because with that life loss, Vilis is going to draw you extra cards. Necrologia is a fantastically efficient draw spell that deserves a lot more respect than it's getting. But now let's move on to our final Quest Recorders card today with Hissing Iguanar. Currently it's 7 cents and sees play in under 400 decks. It's a 3/1 lizard that costs 2 and a red. It says whenever another creature dies, you may have Hissing Iguanar deal 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. This effect works fantastically in aristocrat style strategy. There aren't too many red cards though with this type of effect. And these types of cards usually can't take out planeswalkers either. If you're set up and someone tries to wipe the board, this can be a huge amount of damage at their face. Let's tackle some similar cards though for comparison's sake. Like I mentioned before, this type of effect usually is seen in aristocrat style decks. And no card illustrates this better than Blood Artist. Currently it's $3.75 and sees played over 17,000 decks. It's a 0/1 vampire for 1 and a black and it says whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Even Falkenrath Noble, which does the exact same thing but costs 2 more, sees a lot of play. Now Hissing Iguanar is nowhere near as good as Blood Artist, but it is cheaper than Falkenrath Noble. It's not going to gain you life, but it's still going to take your opponents down. But perhaps a closer card to compare it to is Judith. Currently she's nearly $1 and sees play in over 1,200 decks. She has whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith deals 1 damage to any target. So unlike Hissing Iguanar, she can target creatures. But unlike Hissing Iguanar, she only triggers off of your creatures and only non-token ones too. This makes her much less effective in comparison to things like Blood and Falkenrath Noble, which trigger off of anything. In Aristocrat style decks, you're probably going to have a lot of tokens and ways to deal with opponents' creatures. So because of that, you'll get a lot more triggers from Hissing Iguanar. But now let's go through some decks where it might be a good fit in. First up, there's Prosh, which creates a lot of tokens and sacrifices them too. And then there's Grumgully, which can make persist creatures go infinite. So with Hissing Iguanar on the board, you're just going to win the game. And finally, there's Torbrain, which is going to make Hissing Iguanar deal 3 damage instead of 1. So that damage can add up really quickly. Hissing Iguanar is definitely not for every deck, but it deserves more recognition than it's getting. And if you haven't seen my last Quest for Quarters episode, make sure you check it out here. But now it's time for me to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your personal favorite underrated card is. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future Commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget Commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.